On the show today, we have guest SL Rao. They are a strategist who co-creates new futures in education, health, and climate through design-inspired system transformation. They bring a system-oriented, equity-centered approach to their work and how they build, nurture, and grow teams and organizations. They are curious and driven by the need to find solutions to seemingly intractable problems. Get ready for a great episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-creating curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Hi, Estelle. Welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Same, and I'm let's just dive right in. I'm really excited to learn more about you and invite you to just share, what should the folks who are listening to the podcast or reading the blog version of the podcast kind of keep in mind as we jump into our conversation today.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to set context that I am a equity-centered designer and researcher currently at an organization called Optimistic Design. We are a qualitative research and product design firm. We have deep expertise in education all the way from early learning to higher ed. At the intersection of product design, we do services and strategies as well, but that's our deep expertise because a lot of us also come from the product space. So another aspect of our work is we take a systems lens and focus on learning from and with students who have been historically underserved by the existing systems. So part of taking a systems lens is also understanding all of the other variables that impact student learning and teacher practice and those kinds of things. And then a little bit of very quick background about, what brought me to equity-centered design research and co-designing with students is I started my work in technology actually, but I have navigated over to systems and services, having worked in global health, in government, designing public policy. So I've kind of expanded outside of just like product to thinking about services and systems and policy and how all of these things impact our experiences within the world, our behaviors, and the historical context that are driving some of the decisions that happen today. So that's kind of the lens that I bring overall. Throughout my career, a major focus has been kind of working with and focusing on communities, young people, students who are not served by the larger system, really recognizing that, it's not to be nice, but it's really recognizing that a lot of innovation, ideas, perspectives exist that we're not harnessing. And so by really focusing on communities and people who have the least access to power, we're able to design better services and systems for everybody. So that's kind of the perspective that I come from.
Oh my gosh, that's a fantastic perspective. I love all the lenses that you bring and all of that experience that you have that's even outside of education, but so clearly relevant for education. So excited to keep going with this conversation. I think you spoke a lot to things that I imagine are part of kind of your freedom dream if we were to go to that question. And so I just love the language that Dr. Bettina Love uses where she describes them as dreams grounded in the critique of injustice. So I guess with that framing, what is, that big dream that you hold for education?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that, right? Like in education as a tool to increase critical consciousness for young people. A lot of the times, the way I was educated, I grew up in India, studying in India. I didn't necessarily see the things so I have an engineering degree, for example. So engineering, what I should have abstracted, which I had to do myself, but it wasn't necessarily something that I received as part of my education, was all of the science and STEM classes and engineering. There wasn't a clear connection to say like, here are the critical pieces or here are the mindsets that this is showing you to review and look at the world around me. So I had to do that myself. And so ways in which like education can very clearly from the beginning give students the tools to understand the world, take action, see their part of the system, Because right now, the way technology is evolving, it's evolving at such a fast pace and to a level of abstraction that is really hard to like disentangle how it actually works. And I bring up technology because we are all consumers of technology, and it is continuing to revolutionize how we communicate with one another, how we learn. But we don't want young people to just be consumers. We want them to be critical designers of the futures that they want to see, right? So we don't want futures to just happen. And so I think education has so much to do with that and is a critical component of shifting that perspective and the mindset. And I would, yeah, there's obviously already a lot of like advocacy and action and kind of demystifying happening with young people. Would love that to be a critical component of our educational process and system.
Wow, I love it, so much of that. And then specifically, I just wrote down the critical designers of the futures they want to see part because I think that's so powerful. And I think about that, it's so clear in kind of the STEM and STEAM like
Yes.
realms. It's also clear, I think, to me when I think about being a former literacy teacher or a social studies teacher, right?
Mhm.
We study the past to figure out what the future is going to look like and how we
Yes,
can co-create
exactly.
that, right? Like literacy, like thinking about like Afrofuturism and like sci-fi and fantasy and like imagining that idea of what the world could be in those spaces. Like there's so much that connects to all subject areas. This is so cool. Okay, let's keep going. So I think, sometimes teachers are, I think about teacher school, right? The like don't smile until Christmas and like authority figure, ridiculousness that is part of like traditional teaching methods. And I think that sometimes when we talk about student voice, teachers are like, yeah, yeah, great. But then when we're like, no, it's a true co-creation, there's some hesitancy. And I'm just curious to know what mindset shifts that you would kind of coach people on to truly get to that place that you're describing versus kind of the nominal, like, yay, student voice, but not really co-creating.
Yeah, that's a great question. In we coach a lot of product teams, organizations around like code design, and a lot of people just want to learn the methods. They're like, show me that participatory design research method, right? And so we actually step back and say, like, we want to understand how your organization is set up. What are the mindsets that exist within the organization? What is the culture for true co-design? Are you actually able to shift power in ways that is meaningful and not just, a namesake? You're just saying, yeah, students have power. Because I've been in spaces where, government agencies are trying to do their best. They're like, we're going to bring young people in, the most marginalized young people, experiencing housing insecurity or maybe in the foster care system. We're going to bring them in to give us feedback. And when they do create that space to give that feedback, they're like, they didn't say the right thing, or they didn't say the thing that we wanted, right? Or it's like it didn't apply to what we are doing. It's like, did we spend the time educating young people? So I think a big part for me in the mindset shift is you just mentioned is like, traditional teaching has a lot of like one-way knowledge dumping, right? Like the expert, the teacher, the person standing in the front, there's like a persona for that person, which is interesting even in our research, especially with younger kids, even like middle school students. When we ask about variations of like classrooms, a lot of them actually default to they want the one where the teacher knows and they tell them the thing because that's what they're used to, right? And so really thinking about this old school belief that one person standing in the podium knows best. And a good, teacher has the mindset of learning together and making knowledge with students. So creating those opportunities to shift those mindsets with students, teachers, and themselves, where actually knowledge making is happening together. Like, what are we learning? What is happening? What are we seeing? Because students come with their own bodies of knowledge, their own cultural knowledge, and we want to create that space where we're doing that together. So co-creation starts there. Those like small pieces of shifting away from here's everything that we learned in history, or here's everything that's happening right now. It's like the future is going to look different. The knowledge that we have, we're going to bring together and create something new that's more applicable than these like fixed sets of knowledge. So um, yeah, I think that would be my really big one. And even for leaders, like creating that space where that's possible. And I know there's a lot of other incentives that are against this where, it's like tests and, really thinking about these bigger incentives that de-incentivize this kind of knowledge making. But I still have hope.
Yeah, such a good point about the de-incentivization of like, because stuff like this takes time, right? It takes time
Yeah.
to like build the relationships with students and
Yes.
like get students
Yes.
to kind of come out of that space. Because as a former high school teacher that tried to do this, I can tell you
Yeah.
so many times where students was like, just tell me what to do or what to,
Yeah, you're making me too much work, too much work.
yeah, it's so wild. And I'm like, don't you want this? And it's like, yeah, I think you probably do. And like you have just been told year after year that this is how school goes. And so it's so hard to break out of that. And so I'm really curious about the how. Like, how does this work? Like, how do you share power with students in this way? How do you have like a steps or a framework for this?
Yeah, I think this is, it's small steps, right? Like it's all the small things that we do. Um, Even if we have shared lived experiences with students, we might have like age affinity, or might have like other like indicators that are like, oh, we have like similarities, so this is going to be very easy for us to shift that power. But really, I think a big part of it is really recognizing, as educators, as leaders in the education space, what our positionality is, right? um, the way our society favors like age, for example. So at any given point, a teacher is going to have more power in the system, just in society as a whole. So I think, really thinking about stepping back and really recognizing like, how are we showing up? What are we bringing into the space and how we teach? What mindsets we bring? Are there other mindsets that relate to student assets or student deficiencies, or and these are things like I think over the last few years, a lot more conversation and discussion, willingness to talk about these things and be able to um, confront our own biases and our own the preconceived notions that we're bringing in. But we still need to understand the underlying layers in which ways in which like our positionality um, can cause these like power differentials, right? And then part of it is like being able to acknowledge that power in a space isn't bad. It is when we are pretending it doesn't exist, right? And then the second piece is really thinking about what are ways, small places where, as educators, we hold power. What are the ways, like mapping those out within the classroom? So is it in like being the knowledge sharer, setting the curriculum, disciplinary action, um, you know, uh, what are all of the ways? And I think that's part of like doing it with other educators as well, because they might bring up other perspectives. You also are the conduit to the parent. Like the parent's going to a lot of times listen more to the educator than they will their own child, right? So there are these pieces of like, what are we saying? How are we saying that? And are we thinking in a deficit lens? Are we thinking an asset-based lens? Are we able to really, think through those pieces? And then we start thinking about, okay, where are the places along that continuum of like where power is held? Are there places where we can start creating space where power is shared, right? Like there might be small things like, and really we need to acknowledge that there's always a spectrum, and we might not get to the final end of full collaborative, power sharing within the space, but there are steps that you can take where you're like really mapping that out. And I think as long as we're aware and we're not overselling it, it's okay. So, you're coming in and you're saying, okay, is there choice? We start with choice over what is learned, like what we can focus on. We go into like, are there ways in which students can inform the curriculum? Are there ways in which students can inform how the class discussions happen? Again, like, there might be things within literature where it's like, okay, peer-to-peer learning is great and we want to implement that. Can we give students choice over it? Because not all students are going to want that. Some students just want to work independently. So the more spaces we create, and those are small, those feel very small, right? But they are ways in which we are sharing that power to get to a point where there is shared decision making happening. There's a lot more power. Are there ways in which then, it escalates outside of the classroom? Is there, you don't want to create a space where students have a lot more power in your classroom, but they go outside and they're, hitting up against like larger structures. Are there choices? A lot of times school leadership will do like surveys or like listening sessions that I've heard of, But a lot of those are not necessarily implemented again with this perspective that, oh, students are telling us things that we don't want to work on or we can't work on. Sometimes you can't, you have budgets and these other things, but can we be clear about those limitations so that students are smart? We don't have to hide things from them, and we don't have to give them free rein when there isn't free rein. We can talk to them about what are these constraints and then give them the opportunity to design within that and create space, give them the tools. And a lot of times I think we don't empower young people with the tools. We say we're shifting power, and we're like, we shifted power. You're not doing anything with it. It's like, do they have the tools? Do they have the knowledge to navigate these spaces? And we, as educators and adults who've been in the system where we have had like post-secondary education and master's degrees and maybe even PhDs, we just take some of these things for granted, even if we have a lot of affinity with young people, is like really recognizing like we've had the opportunity to learn and grow in these ways, and we need to create those spaces for young people. And really, I think for me, shifting away from just like talking about things and sitting there with other teachers and mapping things out makes something visual and takes it out of just this language and makes it more clear. So it is a really great tool, and it doesn't need to look pretty, right? Like it's just lines, dots, numbers. You might also, some things what I do when I'm mapping out, and I think of this also as a version of a systems map, mapping out and saying like, okay, what are incentives potentially? Is there like a money incentive? Are there other structural policy related things that might impact this? And how do we work within this? Or it gives us information about what are other pieces of knowledge that we need to share with students to help them. And we can start this at an early grade as well, right? Like start giving choice, variation, and then extend that to get to a point when students are able to have a lot more free reign. Some structure is good, especially when they're younger, and giving choice within that. And we know that over time, like even with parenting, and really recognizing like having them see their choices have a reaction, an impact, and what that feedback loop, because we also need to learn those pieces of it, I think is really helpful. And then the last thing I want to say is like continuous feedback, right? I think as educators, leaders, we need to keep getting feedback on what worked and what didn't work. And we need to be open to that, because we might put our heart and soul, and a student might come back and be like, I just wanted to go back to how it was. And that's okay, right? Like really understanding that feedback isn't bad. It's an opportunity to grow.
Wow, you said so much. This is so cool. I love all the things. The things that are resonating with me specifically are like Laura Lundy has this model of student voice that like connects very deeply to what you're saying. So right, I'm sure that's probably what connected to what you guys have put together. So the idea of influence is really, I think a big one, like the audience and influence piece where like, yes, you have to listen, but then you have to come back and be like, okay, you gave us this feedback in the survey, right? Here's why we didn't go forward with it because we have these parameters, right? Or whatever. And like that means so much to kids because otherwise it's, yeah, I wasn't really listened to. I'm not going to tell you and take the time to tell you the next time, right? It's such a critical step that's so frequently missed that it's like, yeah. I love also from a systems lens, this idea of mapping with a team, because so many times we look at school schedules and we're, doing the where everyone is and all that, and it's overwhelming. And so for either simplicity or because we don't have better models, sometimes we're like, okay, well, we just don't have PLC or team time, and you just have to figure it out and like try to touch base in the hallway. And it's like, no, this is so critical because it affects every moment of the day, and it affects things like this, like the true co-creation. Like we're going to do just things so much better if you have that team time. So I love that you named that. Another piece I was thinking is strategic planning conversations. So from like a leader lens, but also, I mean, I've had students do like root cause analysis for not a strategic planning conversation because they like found an issue they're interested in and wanted to make change. But I've led some of these, and they can be great, and they can also just fall really flat. And so I'm curious if you have either suggestions or like a particular experience that went well or didn't go well, and kind of an analysis of that, of just like, how do we do those better? How do we actually find a root cause and be able to move forward and like make authentic co-created change versus just like check the box, which I've seen a lot at like the state level, for example, just being like, we did it, we wrote something in the box.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the big thing with root cause analysis is we have to, one, understand the systems at play. And when we are experiencing the systems, it's really hard to see it. It's like, your fish don't see the water. I mean, they might not actually be true, but we don't see the error that we're actually going in. And
Hi,
so
this is Leah popping in to share the free resource for this episode, a modernizing math toolkit and report. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/227. Now back to the
flows
show.
where the policies come in and XYZ, and then you can see some of the players. But it can also be kind of more complex systems that intersect, like let's say the justice system or the financial system, where the financial system, yes, you can map it out from like a structural level, but there's so many influences where there's like, oh, there's the larger market. And I'm just, sharing that. It might not necessarily, it does actually impact the education system, right? Like it impacts like parent choice and interest because they're like, okay, now we want school choice for these very specific reasons. There's financial incentives that then drive like variation and change. And I'm talking really big systems, right? Like we want to be able to understand everything that could potentially impact this thing at a classroom level or a societal level. Um, some people go into like the 7 whys process. I don't know if that's what you use. It's like, okay, this is happening, why? And then you answer, you're trying to get to some of the deeper pieces. The deeper pieces in that structure, because it doesn't have necessarily like an expectation of hitting something, like it can just get to like, why? Because parents don't want to, but we don't necessarily understand like, is it the mindset? Is it a financial incentive? Is it XYZ? The teacher doesn't want to. It's like they just don't want to. And it's like, okay, we need to get to the bottom. So a couple of things that a couple of other frameworks that are really helpful. So putting a side pitch, my manager at Optimistic Design, Cheryl Kababa, has a book called Closing the Loop. It is systems thinking for designers, which I think as educators and other people within the system, I feel like everyone is has that you're constantly designing. So she talks about the iceberg diagram where you're looking at what is about like what is actually visible within the system, and you might see the visible pieces might be the more obvious things. It's like maybe their behaviors, or they might be like actual something like more tangible. And then you start digging under the system, and she has like these very specific things that you get to. So by the end of it, you're trying to get to the underlying like sort of societal structure, those mindsets. So it's forcing you to go beyond the obvious. So that's one way to think about it. So then you're getting to some of those bigger pieces. The other one is what I've done is, after doing kind of a systems map, is using a fishbone diagram, which can also be difficult if you've done that, right? But you have to find all of the right, limbs off of the fishbone. So it's like, it's for the viewers who can't see me randomly gesturing, or listeners, there's the middle, which is the spine of the fish, which is you're getting to like from your problem to your solution. And there are different kind of lines at a diagonal, which look at different pieces that can be influencing the problem. And within that piece, what I usually do is I write out all of the possible. So if we say, let me give you an example. If we think about, I'm going to go to youth homelessness because that's kind of top of mind for me right now. So if we think about young people experiencing homelessness, and we are like, okay, what is the underlying, why, right? And so there's the poverty is one. The other could be racism. There could be lack of housing. And so you think about like the socioeconomic. So this is like financial factor. Within the financial factor, you have like workforce development. You have you know, lack of, I don't know, federal funding, or like cuts to federal funding. So pushing families into the deeper into the poverty line. So you think of all of the factors that come from financial. So you have the entire map as a way to pull from and finalize like what we want to pull. This is the other thing with the fishbone diagram, is it prevents us from getting stuck on like a single source for the root cause. I think really recognizing that there's probably multiple root causes, right? For young people experiencing housing insecurity, it's a combination of like, actually it's happening at the level of their parents too. So it's like there's lack of opportunity, there's that causes poverty and systems involvement. There might be other things that all intersect and just create this environment where the young person can no longer stay at home. And so we want to be able to be open to that, and we won't find a single answer. It can feel overwhelming, especially for people who are not used to doing something and then feeling like, oh, we can't do anything with it, is really getting to this piece of what are the things that we want to act on within this? What are the things that we can influence, right? From our earlier question is like, what can we influence and what can we take action on? What can we change with the expectation that it could potentially cascade to some of the other pieces?
Thank you for just going there. I know that was a deviation from what we were talking about, but I think there's so much in here. I mean, I love the idea of the iceberg model, thinking about the societal structure or mindset underlying it. I've thought about mindsets before. I've never thought about like, let's name the societal structure. That is brilliant. And I think gets to kind of the root of pieces, but I even love even more just the idea that there can be multiple, and that's what the fishbone like emphasizes. I was even thinking about, right, like youth homelessness could be like familial like homophobia or transphobia.
Oh yeah,
It could be
totally. That's a
right
very
like
big one.
homophobia or transphobia from potential employers, and then those are actually connected even though
Yes.
they're different systems on the fishbone, but you could
Oh
like
my gosh.
do an
Yes.
annotation about highlighting how actually other mindsets come up there. Like there's so much that you can kind of like blend those two things. So I love that you're giving multiple models because I see such a nice synergy there. And I do wonder if that's something that even students could engage with, right? In that co-creation where like you have this either lived experience or interest, or just like you want to take on this lens of either the system or like this identity or like whatever it is that like is interesting to you. And then you're going to go in this way. And then like it just so clearly would illuminate the value of having multiple people at the table to do the thing. It's really exciting. Now I want to go do one.
I want to say I did this work with young people experiencing housing insecurity a few years ago when I was at the state. We didn't do a fishbone diagram. We just like brainstormed together. And I think what was helpful for the young people in that process is like I was also learning. We were all learning together, right? But a lot of times they were involved in systems that they didn't even realize that the system officially existed. It was a formalized system that they intersected with because our lived experiences don't necessarily show us that those pieces, right? And so they realized they were intersecting with all of these systems, and they also saw that there's other young people around them, either because of their friends, or the friends had involvement, or they had involvement. Just noticing that they are not alone, because a lot of times we're going through this alone. So like doing this root cause with young people is like you're giving them the lens to see the larger system. But you're also a lot of times what we do is we do that and we leave them there, right? And that's kind of taking someone up the mountain and just being like, okay, you're done. You want the closure. So you want to move it into action. And as a lot of times, I think as adults in the system, we are like, okay, we saw the system, yay, but it's actually, you're leaving them in a space of like trauma of being like, what do I do now? Like you're in that like fight or flight. You want to close it out and say like, okay, how are we actually moving towards action? Like, what are the action steps we can actually take? Because then you're creating a space where you're closing that out. And so I know it sounds very floofy, but really just like when we think about our own like body experiences and how we want to see things closed out. And I think it's not necessarily just to like thumbs up it, but it gives people an opportunity to act, or the action in those kinds of things, right? So we want to keep them in a place of like empowerment and action, and not in a place of like feeling like a deer stuck in headlights.
Absolutely. And one of the things I've been playing with lately that's going to lead us into like this next question. I hope this transition works. But is like action can feel really big for both teachers and students, and like, okay, we got to go act. And like people have this idea, I think, in their head sometimes that action means you need to change a federal policy, or you need to go amass 1,000-person protest, or whatever the thing is. And that thinking again about like that bodily experience and just like the idea of healing when we're all like, I just think societally, politically, like there's such an intense divide that is actively like harming kids. And right, that like we need to like have conversations across difference without like harming kids or like
Yeah.
identities, right? And like making sure dignity is upheld. So I'm very interested in like these kind of like micro ways of action and like just being in community and learning a new way that has like I've just read that you have, a healing orientation to your work in education, and I'm curious if you could say more about that because I'd love to learn.
Yeah, definitely. So this is built on the work from Sean Ginwright, who talks about like healing centered engagement. And a lot of our work is in like how when we, it's from a lot of it is from the perspective of research, which I think can still apply here, where a lot of research, if you read online, like even just like looking at, behaviors of young people who are experiencing marginalization, it's a lot of like people who don't have that shared lived experience going in and studying, let's say like Indigenous students in colleges and putting a very deficit based lens on it, right? So saying things like, oh, the community is holding Indigenous students back from succeeding in college because we have such a individualistic perspective of like, if you need to succeed in college, if you need to succeed in this like mainstream American culture, you have to be individualistic, kind of selfish, and you're approaching it differently. And we don't really look at the assets that young people come with, which is a lot. Sometimes it can be their entire community, their cultural backgrounds, their resiliency, and creativity, and all of those pieces, right? So when we a lot of research focuses on like what is wrong with you, why are you doing this? I saw this a lot when I worked in across housing insecurity, foster care, juvenile legal systems. Social workers are trained in those systems to understand like what happened to the young person has to repeat the same story over and over and over again. So you're always asking like, what is wrong with you? What has happened to you? And you're just keeping it in that space. And so young people are leaving those spaces still, holding their trauma. And so I think even in education, we don't talk about trauma as much. I'm seeing a little bit more of that. Also, I think there's this piece of like when you have only a trauma oriented focus, again, you're like empathizing, but a lot of times the empathy is in that space of like it makes the trauma bonding makes us feel better, but it's not actually helping the other person move forward, right? And so we feel great about having heard the story. Oh my gosh, this young person went through so much. This young person who's in our classroom is going through so much at this moment. And we, ask for information and we move forward. A big part of thinking about it from a more healing centered perspective is like shifting our research practices and methods. So it's also shifting how we engage with young people and focusing more on, instead of saying what is wrong with you, is recognizing all of the assets that young people are bringing into the classroom and the school, right? How can we challenge ourselves about how we think about the students and the young people? We have these like social norms and expectations that we kind of push on young people that then recreates a larger expectation of like these deficits versus really really acknowledging the ways in which they are continuing to thrive and do all of these things despite everything that's happening. Like there's an assault on their identities, there's they're on their freedom, and even like preventing them from having access to information, right? And so they are learning how to work within that system where the adults are actively suppressing their educational experience. And not every single adult, but many adults, which can cause a sweeping like change in their experience. So that's kind of like a healing centered orientation. And again, this piece of moving to action. We don't want to stay in this piece of like, let's learn about what's happening, how scared you are, how tired you are. So we did this project called Modernizing Math. And the part of that work was like understanding what the future of math education can look like. And it was exactly what you mentioned earlier. We understood the history to then bring young people, caregivers, and teachers together to design what the future of math can look like. But we wanted it to not be without constraints. We recognize there's a lot of changes happening in the world, like climate is changing, there's technological advances, there's political changes, economic changes. What are potential worlds that could exist because of these changes, right? And so we worked with another organization called Knowledge Works, who does more of like foresight work. And so they developed these like 5 different models. we immersed young people in these like worlds and had them think about what could education and learning math look like. We did see that in the beginning, there was a lot of like, AI is going to take our jobs. There's no point, right? Like there was this just like a very dark conversation that we went into, and really recognizing, yes, that could be true. Yes. And what can we do about it? Given that, what would we like to see? And moving that into like action, acknowledging, and then moving into action as not in any way diminishing what people are feeling, but really recognizing like our power is in like, what does it mean to take action in these places and like, have agency and control?
You're reminding me so much of early, like right after I had graduated and done my dissertation around student voice. I was doing some presentations with a person who has a trauma background in youth, and our kind of thesis was that this like voice and agency were the way that you interact with youth trauma. Is like this is the pathway. So like when we can co-create, when we can imagine this future, right? Like that's an action step. So I just total full circle moment of like, that's so awesome. And I recognize we're almost at time, so maybe we'll do a quick like lightning round for a few more questions. Does that sound okay? Awesome. All right. So one thing, usually, there's so many ideas that people get when they listen or they read over, they're like, okay, I need to like narrow it down to what am I doing in the next 24 hours or something. So is there one thing from this conversation or in addition to this conversation that you would say, here's a good starting point. You can do this today or in the next week or so?
Yeah, I think could be what we talked about earlier is like if people are thinking about sharing power, co-creating, mapping out where are opportunities, even just starting there, just seeing it, and it feels less daunting.
Oh, I love that so much. I also know everyone on this podcast, this next question is just everyone kind of identifies as a lifelong learner. So I'm just curious, either personally or professionally, what's something you've been learning about?
I also do improv. I'm on the ensemble of a improv group in Seattle. And I think one thing that comes up to me is like ways in which like movement can really help change the ways in which we think and bring out other parts of our brain, our creativity. Because that's what you're doing in improv, right? Like people a lot of times say, oh, it's so hard, I would never be able to do that. I'm like, no, you would be able to do that, right? Because it is the ways in which we intellectualize, we sit, we close off our bodies a majority of the day, and that's how our education system is also set up. Ways in which we can move to help create that space to bring out creativity, use voice, use our like imaginations in different ways. We can't go from 0 to 100, but we can create that pathway through our body, our voice, our memories, our imagination, and start that process. So that's something that I'm always learning, and I feel like there's such a vast space for me to learn and grow to be a better improviser.
You are such a cool person, one, and two, that is such a brilliant idea. So thank you for sharing that. And finally, just where can listeners learn more about with you or connect with you?
Yes. So our website, optimistic.design, is a great place to pop in. I'm also on LinkedIn, so people are welcome to find me with my name. And yeah, let me know how they heard about me in the notes so I can make sure to add. Yeah.
Amazing. SL, thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.